When a wildlife photographer finds an old World War II submarine hidden deep in the forest, he quickly calls the police. When scientists finally look inside, they turn white with shock. James Mitchell thought this would be just another regular day of work. He walked through the thick Amazon jungle with his camera gear, following a smaller waterway where the humid air clung to everything. As he went deeper into the forest, something caught his attention, something that shouldn't be there. Through the thick plants and twisted tree branches, he could see the shape of something big and made of metal against the wild forest background. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, maybe just sunlight coming through the trees in a strange way, but as he got closer, his heart started beating faster. There, half hidden by jungle plants, was a huge, rusty submarine. It was stuck in mud and dirt, with green moss and vines covering its body, and it looked like it had been there for many, many years. The markings had faded away, but it was clearly a World War II submarine, sitting abandoned in the middle of the rainforest, miles away from any ocean or river. James stood frozen, unable to believe what he was seeing. How could a submarine end up in this place? These were the only thoughts going through his mind as he stared at the faded, rust-covered letters on the submarine's body. There was no way to explain this logically. His first thought was to walk away, to tell himself he was imagining things, but his curiosity made him move closer. He lifted his camera and started taking pictures, capturing every angle of this strange discovery. His hands shook slightly as he walked around the massive structure. Through his camera lens, he captured details that only made the mystery deeper. Weird symbols carved into the metal, parts of the submarine that looked too well kept for something so old, and what seemed like someone had deliberately tried to cover up sections of the hull. Was this some forgotten piece from the war that was left here by accident? Had someone brought it here on purpose, and why hadn't anyone found it before now? James reached into his bag and pulled out his satellite phone. His fingers trembled as he dialed the local police number. He told them what he had just seen in quick, breathless sentences. "You're not going to believe this," James said into the phone, "but I found a World War II submarine in the middle of the jungle." The officer on the other end sounded doubtful at first, but after listening to James Mitchell's description and seeing the photos he sent through email, they agreed to send a team to check it out. James Mitchell ended the call and sat down on a nearby rock, still staring at the enormous submarine in front of him. The longer he looked at it, the stranger it seemed. How could this massive vessel have ended up so deep in the jungle without anyone knowing about it? And what secrets might it be hiding? Something felt disturbing about the whole situation, something that made him feel like he wasn't alone. Finally, the distant sound of engines broke through the silence. The police had arrived. The team of investigators took one look at the submarine and agreed this was not an ordinary find. One of the officers reached out and pulled at the heavy metal door. To their surprise, it opened easily with a creaking sound, as if someone had been taking care of it. When they stepped inside, the investigators were immediately surprised by how well preserved everything looked. Old control panels lined the walls with dials and switches that looked too clean for something supposedly abandoned since World War II. Some areas showed rust and cracks, but other parts appeared untouched by time. The team looked at each other nervously. How could the inside of a submarine left in the jungle for decades still be in such good condition? One of the officers ran his hand along a control panel, brushing away the dust to reveal what looked like more modern parts wired into the old system. "These don't belong here," he said quietly to himself. Inside the main crew sleeping area, they found a series of personal items that made the mystery even deeper. But it was the more modern items that raised the biggest questions. A stainless steel water bottle that looked brand new sat next to old military equipment, and a flashlight that still worked was tucked under a bed. It wasn't just that these items seemed out of place. They shouldn't have been there at all. Nothing in the historical records of World War II submarines suggested they carried items like these. The deeper they went, the more they realized that this submarine was not an ordinary piece of history. One of the scientists noticed that some of the electrical wiring running through the walls appeared to have been replaced with circuits that looked like post-war technology. "Someone's been here," he whispered, "and recently." Dr. Robert Blake, a historian specializing in wartime codes, compared the symbols with World War II records. "These symbols aren't random markings," he told the group. "This submarine was involved in an unrecorded mission." The room went quiet. The historians, code experts, and scientists all turned toward Dr. Blake, who continued explaining that the symbols indicated a top-secret operation, one that didn't exist in any official records. His discovery made everything more serious. This wasn't just a forgotten piece from the war. It was something far more important, something that had been purposefully hidden away. Then, one of the officers called out from a corner of the crew's sleeping area. "You might want to see this," he said, holding up a leather-covered notebook. It was faded and the edges were worn, but it was still surprisingly intact. They gathered around as he opened it to the first page. It seemed to have belonged to a Lieutenant Mark Stevens, a crew member of the submarine. The entries were dated toward the end of the war in the summer of 1945. The sailor had carefully recorded the day-to-day operations, the tension among the crew, and their growing sense of worry. But as they flipped through the pages, they found something far more disturbing. One entry, dated just before the final days of the war, described a secret mission. The crew had been given direct orders to transport an unknown cargo sealed in a heavy container. The mission was not listed anywhere, completely off the record, and the crew was forbidden to talk about it even among themselves. The diary went on to reveal that they had been warned over and over again never to open the container under any circumstances. The team looked at each other. What could have been inside that container so dangerous or important that it required this level of secrecy? As they continued reading, the tension grew. The notebook hinted at the crew's increasing paranoia. Lieutenant Stevens described how some of the crew members had begun to act strangely. He wrote about sleepless nights, about the feeling that the mission was cursed, that they were carrying something far more dangerous than they had been told. Then the entry stopped suddenly. The last page was left unfinished, as though the writer had been interrupted in the middle of writing. "We're getting close to the drop point," it read. "The captain says." And then nothing. They looked at one another. The submarine wasn't simply abandoned. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the crew had never made it back to report on their mission. But then came the most frightening discovery of all. As Dr. Blake continued analyzing the symbols and comparing them with historical data, he noticed something even stranger. This submarine didn't complete its journey in the 1940s, he said quietly, his face pale as he ran his finger along a section of the hull. The room became very still. "It was moved, possibly decades later," he continued, pointing to evidence that showed signs of post-war modifications, including advanced wiring and modern components. It may have been used for something else entirely after the war. This vessel's story didn't end when World War II did. Meanwhile, one of the investigators on site had sent satellite images back to his office for analysis. If they could determine when the submarine arrived in the jungle, it might give them a clue as to who had brought it there. Hours later, the satellite images came back. What they revealed made everything even more serious. The submarine hadn't been in the jungle since the 1940s, as they had originally thought. The satellite data showed that the submarine had only been moved to its current location in the early 1980s, decades after World War II had ended. This revelation completely destroyed their previous understanding. Someone had moved this massive vessel and buried it deep in the jungle. "What the hell is going on?" one of the officers muttered. Theories flew back and forth among the group. No one knew for certain what the submarine had been used for, but one thing was clear: its presence in the jungle was no accident. It had been hidden for a reason, and the modern technology found inside was a clue that whatever the operation had been, it had involved forces far beyond their understanding. The sense of dread grew as they realized they were no longer investigating a piece of history. They were exploring and trying to make sense of a vessel tied to dangerous, shadowy events that had spanned decades. Could the submarine have been used for spying? Did it transport sensitive information or even advanced technology? Or was there something far more dangerous aboard, something that, if discovered, could change everything? Clues from the submarine's interior led them deeper into the jungle. After hours of exploration, they found something that would change the course of their investigation. An abandoned military base overgrown with thick vines and largely hidden by the dense forest. The base appeared deserted, but the crumbling structures and faded symbols were unmistakable. This place had once been a center of military activity. The team approached carefully. The abandoned complex had rusted gates and collapsed buildings overgrown with vines. Some walls bore faded Cold War symbols, confirming their suspicions that the submarine and base were connected to a secret operation. Inside one of the main buildings, they made a series of shocking discoveries. Old filing cabinets, once locked shut, had been forced open. Papers and documents were scattered across the floor. As the investigators searched through the wreckage, they found records and blueprints. Blueprints that described not only the submarine but also modifications that had been made to it during the 1980s. The markings on the blueprints matched the strange symbols they had seen carved inside the submarine. "This base was used to modify the submarine," one of the scientists said. "Look at this, they added advanced components, technology that didn't exist during World War II. It became increasingly clear that the submarine had been part of a classified Cold War operation, one that had never been officially documented. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much." As they continued to search through the base, they found pieces of equipment and records that shouldn't have existed in the area they were supposedly from. Advanced communication devices, blueprints for weapon systems, and strange unmarked boxes containing what appeared to be prototypes of early computing technology, all far too sophisticated for the time. The twist came when they uncovered another detailed notebook buried under a pile of debris. It was written in code, but one thing was clear: it contained references to a top-secret cargo that had been transported aboard the submarine. The details of the cargo were vague, but the logs confirmed that the submarine had been tasked with moving it to a secure location, and the mission had been cloaked in secrecy with only a select few aware of its true purpose. The base had been abandoned, the submarine hidden away, and its crew erased from history. But why? Once back at the submarine and armed with the blueprints and a clear understanding of the submarine's modified interior, the team knew exactly where to look. According to the blueprints, a hidden compartment in the bottom of the vessel had been welded shut and deliberately concealed from anyone who didn't know its location. It took several minutes for the team to find it and remove the rusted bolts and seals. Inside was a single metallic device. It was large, rectangular, and covered in what appeared to be a mesh of wires and strange components. It was polished and intact, with no signs of age or decay, as though it had been placed there yesterday. "What is this?" one of the officers whispered. Dr. Harrison, one of the lead scientists, stepped forward. He examined the device more closely. His fingers traced along the edge of the metal. Then something clicked in his mind. He stepped back suddenly. "I've seen this before," he said. Dr. Harrison hesitated. This is part of a project tied to advanced energy research. There were experiments conducted during the war, top-secret stuff involving energy manipulation, something to do with early theories of nuclear energy, but far more experimental. Most of the documentation was destroyed after the war, but I've read about it in classified archives. The team gathered around the device. Dr. Harrison examined it again. This wasn't just an artifact from the past, it was something far more dangerous. But they had no choice. They needed to know what was inside. One of the engineers began to take apart the outer covering. As the layers were removed, the core of the device was exposed. In the center was a cylindrical container with markings that sent a chill down Dr. Harrison's spine. "These markings," he whispered, "are related to early nuclear research, but this isn't just any reactor or energy source. This could be a prototype for something far more powerful." Dr. Harrison leaned in closer. His face turned pale, and his breath caught in his throat. This is a weapon," he said. "If this had been activated, it could have altered the course of history." Everyone froze. The device wasn't just some experimental energy project. It was a prototype for a weapon that could have unleashed devastation on a scale never seen before. It had been hidden inside the submarine for decades, forgotten by time. But why? One of the officers remembered the notebook they had found earlier. The unfinished entries from Lieutenant Stevens had hinted at something being terribly wrong with the mission. They retrieved the notebook and began scanning the last few pages. And then they found it. The final entry was brief, hastily written in shaky handwriting. Lieutenant Stevens had written about the growing tension aboard the submarine as they approached their final destination. The crew had been ordered to bury the device in the jungle, far away from any civilization, knowing that if it fell into the wrong hands, it could bring about catastrophic consequences. But the entry ended with a frightening warning. "They're coming for us. We were never supposed to make it back. They don't want this technology falling into enemy hands. We've been betrayed." The team stared at the words. The realization sank in like a heavy weight. The submarine's crew had been targeted by an organization, likely tied to a government or intelligence agency, someone who wanted to keep this technology hidden at all costs. The crew had never made it back because they were never meant to. They had been silenced, and their mission had been buried along with the deadly cargo. The discovery of the abandoned World War II submarine, the secret military base, and the advanced technology hidden within left the team of scientists and authorities in stunned silence. They had uncovered something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. Technology that was ahead of its time, a weapon that could have changed the course of history, and a mission shrouded in secrecy and betrayal. They now faced an impossible decision: what to do with their newfound knowledge and the dangerous device they had uncovered. If word of the discovery reached the wrong people, the consequences could be catastrophic. As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave the jungle, they knew that this discovery would remain hidden from the public. The submarine, the base, and the weapon would remain a dark, forgotten chapter of history, known only to those who had uncovered it. Did you enjoy this story? What would you do if you found a mysterious submarine in the jungle? explore it alone, or call for help? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Sometimes the smart choice is asking for help. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.